Emma stepped into the house, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. The scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, and the faint hum of the evening news played in the background. Daniel sat on the couch, his laptop open, his focus seemingly on the screen. She hesitated for a moment, adjusting the strap of her handbag, willing her heart to settle into a normal rhythm. "You're home late," Daniel remarked, his tone casual as he typed something on his keyboard. Emma forced a smile, walking over to the counter to pour herself a glass of water. "Yeah, work ran late. A couple wanted to tour a property last minute," he nodded, glancing at her briefly before returning to his screen. "Did they like it?" She sipped her water, hiding the slight tremble in her fingers. "Not sure yet. They want to sleep on it." He didn't press further, and relief washed over her. He never questioned her anymore. In the beginning she had expected suspicion, maybe even jealousy, but there had been none. If anything, Daniel had grown more distant, more absorbed in his work, making it all too easy for her to slip away unnoticed. Jason had left a faint mark on her collarbone earlier that evening, one she had carefully concealed with makeup before coming home. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, but the thrill outweighed the risk. The affair had begun as an escape, an intoxicating rebellion against the predictability of her life. Jason was everything Daniel was not, wild, spontaneous, untamed. He made her feel alive in ways she had forgotten were possible. She had met him at the gym, his confidence effortless, as he spotted her during a workout session. The flirtation had started subtly, lingering glances, teasing remarks, a light touch on her lower back as he adjusted her posture. She had told herself it was nothing, just harmless fun. But then came the texts, the late-night conversations, the way her stomach fluttered every time his name appeared on her phone. The first time they crossed the line had been in a dimly lit hotel room, the air thick with anticipation. Guilt had gnawed at the edges of her mind, but she had silenced it, convincing herself that she deserved this, deserved to feel wanted, desired. She had been careful at first, deleting messages, ensuring there was no trace of her betrayal. But as time passed, caution gave way to complacency. Daniel never checked her phone. He never questioned her sudden interest in working late. He never noticed the scent of another man on her skin, or so she thought. Sitting across from him now, she studied his face, looking for any sign that he knew, but his expression remained unreadable, his attention locked on his screen. "I'm going to shower," she said, setting her glass down. He nodded without looking up. As she walked down the hallway, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that something was off. She ignored it. The next morning she woke to the smell of fresh coffee and bacon sizzling in the pan. Daniel stood by the stove, dressed in his usual crisp shirt and slacks, humming softly as he flipped the bacon. "You're in a good mood," she noted, slipping onto one of the bar stools. He turned, offering her a small smile. "Just felt like making breakfast today." She watched him carefully as he placed a plate in front of her. It was their routine, him cooking, her pretending not to notice how much effort he put into making things feel normal. "Got any big plans today?" he asked, taking a sip of his coffee. She swallowed a bite of toast. "Not really, just showing a few properties." He nodded. "Anything interesting?" "Not really," she repeated, forcing herself to sound casual. "Mostly repeat clients." She expected him to move on, to drop the subject like he always did, but instead he tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Must be exhausting, working so many late nights," he mused. Her grip tightened around her fork. "Yeah, well, comes with the job." He took another sip of coffee, his eyes never leaving hers. "I imagine Jason keeps you busy too." The air shifted, her pulse hammered against her ribs, the room suddenly too quiet. She forced a laugh, but it sounded unnatural even to her. "Jason?" His smile didn't falter. "Your trainer. You mention him a lot." She set her fork down, her mind racing. I guess I do. He's just a good trainer." Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter. "Good enough to text at midnight? To meet at hotels?" Ice flooded her veins. She opened her mouth, but no words came. He knew. Every single cell in her body screamed at her to deny, to deflect. But something about the way he looked at her, the calm certainty in his eyes, told her it was useless. He had been waiting for this moment. She swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You really thought I wouldn't notice?" Panic rose in her throat. It's not what you think." His eyes darkened. "Oh, I think it's exactly..." She wanted to run, to get away from the suffocating weight of his gaze, but she was frozen in place. "How long?" he asked, his voice too steady. Her lips parted, but the truth felt like shards of glass in her throat. He let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "You know what? Don't answer that. It doesn't matter anymore." A fresh wave of fear crashed over her. "Daniel, please." He stood up, grabbing his keys. "You should finish your breakfast," he said, his tone light, almost mocking. "You're going to need your strength." She stared at him, her pulse wild. "What do you mean?" He turned to face her fully, the mask of indifference slipping just enough for her to see the storm brewing beneath it. "You'll find out soon enough." And with that, he walked out the door, leaving her breathless, terrified and painfully aware that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Emma stepped into the house, her eyes scanning the quiet living room. Daniel's jacket was draped over the couch, his laptop open on the coffee table. The faint sound of water running in the shower echoed down the hall. She exhaled, relieved. He was home, just as she had expected. She slipped off her heels, carefully placing her handbag by the door. Her fingers grazed over her phone, quickly opening the messages from Jason. She smiled at his last text, the playful teasing, the promise of their next meeting. Everything had been going so smoothly. Daniel had never questioned her late nights, never pressed for details. He had always trusted her. The sound of the water shutting off snapped her out of her thoughts. She locked her phone and placed it on the counter before grabbing a glass of water. As she took a sip, she noticed Daniel's wallet sitting next to his laptop. The corner of a bank statement peeked out from beneath it. She frowned. He never left paperwork lying around. She reached for it, curiosity prickling at her senses. Her eyes skimmed over the document, and a cold chill crept down her spine. Several large withdrawals, transfers to an account she didn't recognize. The amount was staggering, far more than their usual expenses. Her heart pounded as she flipped through the pages. He had been moving money for weeks, bit by bit. Her name had been removed from their joint savings. Credit lines she had access to were closed. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. It had to be for something innocent, an investment maybe, a business opportunity he hadn't mentioned. She set the paper down just as Daniel stepped into the kitchen, his hair damp, a towel draped around his neck. "You're home early," he said, reaching for a bottle of water. She forced a smile. "Yeah, the last showing got cancelled." He nodded, unscrewing the cap and taking a sip. "Quiet day, then?" Her fingers tensed against the counter. "Yeah, pretty quiet." She waited for him to mention the finances, to explain the missing money, but he didn't. Instead, he grabbed his phone from the counter and scrolled through it, a small smirk playing at the corner of his lips. She studied him, unease settling in her stomach. For the past few weeks, something had felt different. He had stopped asking where she was going. He no longer inquired about her day in the way he used to. There were no more playful texts, no more concerned calls when she was late. At first she had been relieved. His lack of attention made it easier to keep her secret. But now it unsettled her. Daniel was acting too normal, too calm. And now, the missing money. She licked her lips. "Have you been making changes to our accounts?" He raised an eyebrow. "Why do you ask?" She hesitated. "I just noticed a few withdrawals." He didn't blink. "Yeah, just moving some things around." Her stomach twisted. "For what?" He shrugged. "Investments." She waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. Her pulse quickened. "You didn't mention anything about investments." He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Didn't I?" Her fingers curled into a fist. Something was wrong, but before she could press further, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then smirked. "I've got to take this work stuff." She watched as he stepped into his office, shutting the door behind him. The sinking feeling in her stomach grew heavier. The following week, Emma sat at her desk, flipping through property listings, struggling to focus. The tension at home was gnawing at her, but she had pushed it aside, convincing herself she was overthinking things. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, expecting Jason's name, but her stomach lurched when she saw HR office instead. Frowning, she answered, "Hello?" "Emma, we need you to come to the conference room, now." The cold urgency in the woman's voice made her grip tighten around her phone. She stood slowly, her heart hammering. As she stepped into the conference room, she was met with a panel of serious faces. The head of HR sat in the middle, a printed stack of papers in front of her. Emma's. Chest constricted. "What's going on?" the HR director sighed. "Emma, we received an anonymous email containing inappropriate messages between you and a man named Jason." Her blood ran cold. She barely heard the next words. Screenshots, explicit texts, locations of meetups. The email had been sent to the entire executive team. Her vision blurred as she grabbed the documents, her own words staring back at her in black and white. "I didn't. This isn't." But there was no denying it. Her heart pounded. How? How had this happened? "Emma, this is highly inappropriate conduct, and it reflects poorly on the company. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated." She couldn't breathe. She wanted to deny, fight, scream, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her affair, her secret, was now public knowledge, and the person who had sent the email, she already knew. Her hands shook as she gripped the papers. Daniel, he had known. Not just known, he had planned this. She stumbled out of the office, barely able to think. The drive home was a blur, her mind racing. By the time she stepped into the house, she was trembling. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. He glanced up when he saw her, then checked his watch. "Home early again?" Her entire body shook with anger. "You did this." He leaned back in his chair, tilting his head. "Did what?" She slammed the papers onto the table. "You sent these." He smirked. "And what exactly are those?" Her breath hitched. "You know exactly what they are." His smirk didn't fade. "Looks like someone exposed your little secret. That's rough." Tears burned in her eyes. "How could you?" He stood slowly, his eyes dark and sharp. "How could I?" He took a step closer. "How could you, Emma?" She shook her head, panic clawing at her throat. "Daniel, please." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You had no idea, did you? No idea I knew. No idea I was watching. You thought you were in control." Her pulse pounded, his voice dropped lower, colder. "I let you think you were getting away with it. I let you feel safe. I let you dig your own grave." Her legs felt weak. "Please, Daniel, we can fix this." He let out a bitter chuckle. "Fix this?" His gaze hardened. You lost your job today. Tomorrow you'll lose even more. She sucked in a sharp breath. What do you mean? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. I took your name off the accounts, cancelled your cards, and filed for divorce. Her stomach dropped. Number no, please. He tossed the envelope onto the table. You thought I didn't know? Tears spilled down her face. Daniel, I love you. His expression remained stone cold. No, Emma, you don't. You just don't want to lose everything. She shook her head desperately. I made a mistake. Please. He turned away. You'll find out what a real mistake feels like soon enough. And then he was gone, leaving her with nothing but regret, nothing but the wreckage of her own choices. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers trembling as she refreshed her online banking app for the third time. The numbers on the screen remained the same, a nearly empty account, a fraction of what had been there just days ago. Her heart pounded as she checked the credit card statements, hoping for some mistake. Declined. Closed. No longer accessible. A cold sweat broke out on the back of her neck. She dialed the bank's customer service, barely able to steady her voice as she navigated the automated menu. After what felt like an eternity, a representative finally answered. Ma'am, I see that all transactions were made by the primary account holder, the woman said. Emma swallowed hard. But it's a joint account. Your name was recently removed. You'll need to speak with the account holder for further details. Emma's stomach dropped. Daniel! Her hands clenched into fists as she tried to process what was happening. He had planned this, slowly moving money, waiting for the right moment to strike. She grabbed her phone and dialed his number, straight to voicemail. Her breathing quickened as she sent a text. Emma. Daniel, what the hell is going on? The message remained unread. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she scrolled to another contact and pressed call. Jason picked up after a few rings. Hey, what's up? Relief flooded her, but she forced herself to stay calm. Jason, I need to see you. Something happened. There was a pause on the other end. Yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. Her stomach twisted. What? I mean, I didn't sign up for all this drama. She gripped the phone tighter. Jason, I just lost access to all my money. I need you, he sighed. Look, Emma, this was fun, but you knew what this was. A lump formed in her throat. You said you cared about me. I said a lot of things, he said, his tone casual. It doesn't mean I meant them. Her blood turned to ice. So you're just done? Yeah, he said, I'm moving on. You should too. The line went dead. Emma stared at the screen, her hands shaking. Jason had never planned to stay. He had never been serious about her. She had risked everything for him, and now he had discarded her like she meant nothing. A sob choked her throat as she tried calling again. Blocked. Tears blurred her vision as she slammed the phone onto the bed. Everything was crumbling around her. She had no money, no lover, no one to turn to. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Wiping her eyes, she reached for it, her heart racing as she saw a message from her friend Anna. Anna. Emma? What is going on? Confusion shot through her. She opened the text and saw a link to a social media post. With shaky fingers, she clicked on it. Her stomach twisted into a tight knot as her own texts filled the screen. Explicit messages, secret rendezvous details, hotel receipts, photos of her and Jason at the gym, in restaurants, in the parking lot where they had stolen quick kisses. The caption underneath the screenshots made her breath hitch. Loyalty is a choice. Some people fail. Hundreds of comments flooded the post. Wow, she really thought she wouldn't get caught. This is disgusting. Daniel deserves so much better. The room spun around her as she scrolled. Her colleagues had seen it. Her friends had seen it. Even her parents had been tagged. Her hands flew to her mouth as she gasped for air. A new message popped up from her mother. "Mom, call me." A wave of nausea rolled through her as she pressed dial. The phone barely rang before her mother picked up. "Emma!" Her mother's voice was sharp, full of disappointment. "Tell me this isn't true," her voice cracked. "Mom, You humiliated us," her mother snapped. "The entire family saw this. Your father can't even look at the messages." Tears streamed down Emma's face. "Mum, please, you have to believe me. I don't want to hear it." Her mother's voice trembled. "We raised you better than this." Emma's stomach clenched. "Please don't turn your back on me." There was a long pause. "You turned your back on yourself," her mother said quietly. "We don't want to be part of this." The line went dead. Emma let out a broken sob, her body shaking as she collapsed onto the floor. Her own parents were ashamed of her. Her colleagues would never look at her the same way again. The entire world had seen her downfall. She had no way out. Emma sat in the dimly lit motel room, her fingers gripping the edges of the thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener, a far cry from the luxurious home she had once shared with Daniel. She had barely eaten in days, her appetite crushed under the weight of shame and despair. The events of the past few weeks played in an endless loop in her mind. Her career ruined, her bank accounts emptied, her affair exposed to the world. A knock at the door sent a jolt of fear through her. She hesitated before getting up, her body weak from exhaustion. As she cracked the door open, a courier stood in front of her, holding an envelope. "Emma Carter?" She swallowed hard. "Yes." "Sign here," he said, holding out a clipboard. Her hands trembled as she scrawled her signature. The courier nodded, handed her the envelope, and left without another word. She stared at it, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Deep down, she already knew what it contained. Her fingers tore at the seal, pulling out the stack of crisp legal documents. The first page confirmed her worst fear. Daniel had filed for divorce. The grounds were clearly stated: infidelity, emotional distress, financial deception. Her stomach clenched as she flipped through the pages. Daniel wasn't just leaving her. He was taking everything. The house, his name was the only one on the deed. The savings. She had no legal claim to what he had quietly transferred into his private accounts. Her car, also registered, under him. Even the jewellery she had once flaunted, the designer clothes she had worn so proudly, all of it had been bought with his money. Her fingers shook as she reached the final page. A note was attached, written in Daniel's familiar handwriting. "You thought I didn't know. I always knew." A sob tore from her throat as the reality crashed down on her. This wasn't just revenge, it was destruction. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She lunged for it, a desperate hope flickering in her chest. Maybe it was Daniel. Maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe. Unknown number. "Ms. Carter, this is a notice that your eviction date is set for next Friday. Please vacate the premises accordingly." Her breath hitched. Evicted. She had assumed she had time, at least a few weeks, to figure something out. But no. Daniel had already ensured she had nowhere to go. She dialed his number, the call going straight to voicemail. She tried again and again. Nothing. She screamed in frustration, flinging the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud before clattering to the floor. The screen cracked, but still glowing. There were no messages from friends, no calls from family. Everyone had abandoned her. 3 days later, she sat in a cafe, nursing a cup of black coffee, the cheapest item on the menu. She had barely scraped together enough cash for it, her credit card still frozen. The barista had given her a strange look when she counted out loose change to pay. She tugged her coat tighter around her shoulders, watching as a group of co-workers from her former office walked in. Her heart pounded as she recognized them. They hadn't seen her yet. She grabbed her bag, about to leave, when she heard her name. "Emma?" She turned slowly, forcing a smile. "Hey, Anna." Anna's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Pity, disgust, maybe both. The others whispered among themselves, their gazes darting toward her before quickly looking away. She knew what they were thinking. She had gone from powerful real estate agent to a scandal-ridden disgrace. Anna hesitated before speaking. "How are you?" Emma forced a laugh, but it came out brittle. "Never better." Anna didn't laugh. Silence stretched between them before Anna finally spoke again. "Daniel came by the office the other day." Emma's stomach twisted. "Oh." "He looked good, really good," Anna said carefully. "Honestly, I don't think I've ever seen him happier." Emma clenched her jaw. "And that's great for him." Anna hesitated before continuing. "He wasn't alone." The air around Emma grew thick. "He was with someone," Anna added. "A woman, blonde, stunning. They seemed close." A knife twisted in Emma's chest. Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup as she swallowed the lump in her throat. Anna sighed. "Look, Emma, I don't know what you expected, but—" Emma cut her off. "I have to go." She grabbed her bag and walked out of the cafe without another word. Her legs carried her down the street aimlessly, the cold air biting against her skin. She told herself she didn't care, that Daniel had the right to move on. But the image burned in her mind, him smiling, laughing, touching another woman. She had expected anger, pain, resentment, not happiness. That evening she found herself standing outside a restaurant, staring through the large windows. The soft glow of candlelight illuminated the tables inside, casting a warm ambiance over the intimate setting. Her breath caught when she saw him. Daniel sat at a table near the window, a glass of wine in his hand, his expression light and carefree. Across from him sat the blonde woman, her laughter ringing through the air as she leaned closer to him. Emma's heart clenched. Daniel had truly moved on. And he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. She had spent weeks drowning in shame, hoping for some kind of reconciliation, an apology, a second chance. But Daniel had never looked back. She turned away, feeling the full weight of her downfall. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her breath hitching when she saw his name. "Daniel, you were always replaceable." Her hands shook. A fresh wave of humiliation crashed over her as she read the words again. No anger, no bitterness, just cold, absolute finality. She had once thought she held the power. She had thought she was in control. She had thought Daniel would never leave. But now she was the one standing alone in the cold, with nothing left but regret.